Okay, welcome back. Part 2 of everything crap in my life. So, I had just gotten diagnosed with EDS and autism. Actually, at the time, I was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome because that's what it was called in 2007, 2008. But after I'd taken some time off and I had gotten those diagnoses, I wanted to continue my scholastic career, continue my life. So I did a bridging program at Murdoch University, and I didn't end up getting in there. And then I tried the Edith Cowan University bridging program, and I did get in there. Now, we had established that part of the reason I was doing so poorly at school was because there was too much for me to keep track of on top of everything else. So I tried doing 3 units for a while, and then I dropped it to 2 units because it was a choice between passing 2 units or flunking 3 or 4. Gonna choose the 2. And that was for disability reasons, and I even got a note written from a psychiatrist or my doctor or something explaining why I was doing less units. But because I didn't have a job, I couldn't do a job while going to uni. Same problem as doing too many units. And my mom didn't have a job because she was still dealing with her back injury and with the insurance commission. And my grandma didn't have a job because she was a grandma. And so I applied for Centerlink to try and, have at least a little bit of money to pay for groceries and stuff. Normally, you can get Oz Study here if you're a student at uni. And that's not a huge amount of money, but it's some, and it helps. But because I wasn't doing enough hours to qualify for Oz Study, even though I had a good reason because of disability, they put me on Job Seeker instead. So I was under constant pressure to try and find a job, even though finding a job would have immediately derailed me being at uni. And furthermore, the only kind of jobs I could get were menial, and I wouldn't be able to do them with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. But the government didn't care. So constant pressure there, and it would ramp up every summer when uni went on break, because I wasn't even doing uni then. So they would pressure me to find a job really hard for a couple months, but who the hell's going to hire me for a couple months doing a non-menial job that I'm just going to have to leave again when I go back to uni? By the time they train me up, I'll be gone. But still, I had to do it, and I had to get signatures from all these different companies saying that I had applied for a job there, and that was intensely stressful. Made myself sick with fear on a regular basis. And also on top of that, around about then, Dana, my mom's mom, got cancer, so we had to take care of her during all that. Again, couldn't afford someone to come in. But there were some good parts. There are some bonuses to getting diagnosed. Because of my diagnosis, I was able to go do riding for the disabled, RDA, which I loved. I'm a, geek, born and bred. I don't really like sports or any physical activity, but I loved horse riding. First time I've ever loved a sport, and I truly loved it. I didn't just have fun, I loved it. And first I was just doing, fun horse riding, but I started to get really into it, and eventually I started doing some low-level dressage. I bought special equipment for it, and I did all this training, and it was great. I was almost a participant in the Special Olympics at one point, but they ended up sending another student in my place. I was going to go over to Queensland to ride in a comp there in the Special Olympics, but I lost my slot. Some other girl took precedence, and I loved that so much. And I did that for several years, continuing on with uni, struggling a lot, submit nearly all of my assignments late, had to repeat a bunch of units just because dealing with that and chronic depression and autism with no support and Ehlers-Danlos syndrome with no support, and just, it was a clusterfudge. And And then in 2014, my EDS got significantly worse. All that time, I had been suffering from chronic pain. It's part of EDS. You're constantly injuring yourself and pulling muscles and doing all sorts of stuff, and it's aches and pains everywhere. It's like I'm a granny on the inside. And I would keep trying a new painkiller to try and get rid of the pain, but one of the ironic side effects of EDS is a lot of painkillers don't work on you, or they give you really gnarly side effects. So I would try something, and then it would make me sick, or give me migraines, or do something else to me, or it would just not work at all. Mostly, though, it made me sick. So that was disrupting my life as well, and I was in pain, so that's, stressful and depressing. But it got worse and worse, and then in 2014 there was a steep drop for some reason. It just happens that way. And I went from walking like 10 to 12k steps a day, like 4 and 5 kilometers a day, down to only being able to walk a maximum of 6k steps per day without impacting the next day. I had to keep my movement as low as possible so I could continue to function. And I ended up having to give up horse riding because it was just taking me longer and longer to recover from horse riding day. And it took me many years to get over that, and I'm still not really over that. I miss it so much. But and I couldn't walk and I couldn't do things anymore. So that was when I came to grips with I had come to grips a couple of years earlier with the fact that I would need mobility equipment at some point in my life. But it looked like it was going to be a lot sooner than I thought. And I went to the specialist I was seeing at the time for EDS, and I said, I can't do this anymore. This isn't working. I'd like to start the paperwork to get me a wheelchair. And he said, okay, well, could you try for me one last medication? There's a new one that's really good. It's worked for a lot of my other patients. We'll see if it works for you. And if it doesn't work, then we'll do that. And we tried that, and it did work for me, with no side effects. If I forget to take it, I get some pretty gnarly withdrawals, but that's part and parcel of most of the good painkillers, so it's what you gonna do. And I wasn't able to go back to horse riding, but I was at least able to keep walking and doing stuff, and I'm not in a wheelchair yet. Probably will be at some point, but I don't think that's anytime soon. All I use is, I have a rollator I use sometimes, but mostly I walk just unsupported. Oh, I have leg braces. I do wear leg braces. So I guess I do walk supported. Anyway. So finally, somewhere in there, the insurance commission was being so terrible, my mom ended up taking them to court. And that was a court case that lasted several years, but eventually that got settled, and they paid her out a whole bunch and stopped being terrible human beings for 5 seconds. And that was really great. My mom was able to, at that point, we were living in Dana's house because we couldn't afford to have our own house. But she was able to, after that, buy her own apartment. And also able to move back to the US because she decided she wanted to do that and try and get a job there. And then if she could go back to being a flight attendant there, she could still fly down and take care of Dana, but she could work up there. When you're a flight attendant, you can do that. She was doing it before the bus crash. So she went up there for a while to try and get a job, and I took over her apartment here, moved out of the student village, and lived in her apartment, which is important because then in 2015, I want to say, I got a call as I was on my way to school, and she let me know that she'd been sick a lot lately, and she went to the doctor, and it was cancer, and she would need to start treatment pretty much immediately. And she didn't have insurance in the US yet because she hadn't gotten a job yet, so she would need to move back here for treatment, and she moved back within a week, to live in her apartment, but my apartment, and there was only one bedroom, so she slept on my couch for the next year. And we've always had a difficult relationship, and that strained it quite a lot. It did permanent damage to our relationship, which we've slowly recovered from. But I'd do it again in a heartbeat. You gotta do it for family. But it was very stressful. I know I keep saying that, but it's a repeating theme in my life. And I had to take care of her, and she underwent radiation and got sicker and sicker and just could not take care of herself at all. For a lot of that, she was barely even a person, just a ghost on my couch. A zombie. And eventually, though, they got rid of it all, and she finished the radiation, and that's good. And then she went back like 6 months later for a checkup, and they found there was a little bit extra cancer, but it was in a really difficult spot, and they'd have to do surgery to get it out. And this particular surgery, there was a 50% chance that she'd never speak again, and a 75% chance that she wouldn't be able to eat normally again. She'd have to move to a NG tube. And yeah, so the surgery was scheduled for a couple months later. So for a couple months, we tried to have every last voice conversation that we'd ever want to have. I was going to learn sign language, and so was she. It's not like she was going to die, but yeah, I thought I'd never hear my mom's voice again. And she, if you record your voice and record a lot of voice samples beforehand, they can actually make you a voice box, like Stephen Hawking's little box, that actually sounds kind of like you. So she went somewhere and spent days and days and days reading off all these sample texts so that they could do that. And I think sometimes about how incredibly lonely and scary that must have been. I wouldn't wish that on anyone. But she beat the odds. Mad props to her surgeon. To mention his dad. Saved my mom. Saved her voice and saved her esophagus. She talks and eats food like a champion. I don't know what to say. But yeah, that was pretty awful point in my life. And then what happened after that? Continuing to be at uni, continuing to barely be at uni. I got medical exemptions a lot for stuff because I had to take care of Mom and Dana and other stuff. So my grades were absolutely abysmal. I don't even want to know what it is. My GPA must be something like 50% or less. But yeah, just barely hung on there in uni. And then some stuff happened with regards to financials and the family financials, and it looked like I would need to move somewhere that would have made my life significantly worse, and I would have lost a lot of independence and function as a result of that, and that would have had a snowballing effect where if I couldn't do things, then I would lose even more fun. It's hard to explain, but it looked like my life was going to get a lot worse, and I resolved to finally kill myself. And then some personal stuff happened, stuff that I don't think you would understand if you haven't been there. But I snapped out of it, and I stopped being suicidally depressed in 2017. 2001 to 2017. And then shortly after that, I tripped and fell into the internship at BHP. And the rest, as they say, is history. Thanks for listening.